Source, the way I think about it, is essentially how you've developed your feelings and natural reactions towards a particular topic. In the realm of finance, I think those who study behavioral finance and just behavioral psychology around financial decision making, like many things, realize that a lot of that source comes from when you're developing as a child and what was mirrored for you or what you didn't have, as an example, from your guardians, typically the people that made those decisions on your behalf growing up. The way I think about it, I like to look to a few places for examples of that. In my own life, I grew up with a mother and a father, and they were married until I was about 7 years old, at which point they had a divorce. And for me, it was, for the first part of my life, I grew up with a household that was unified. A lot of it, I don't really remember the details because I was so young. But then at 7, I sort of had to start making decisions about managing my time and understanding sort of the financial implications of my parents' distinct households. And that led me to look more into their backgrounds and how they grew up with money and what their relationships were like. And just a quick summary is my mother grew up in Central America, in Guatemala, grew up on a farm, so she had a relatively simple economic life. But her father owned the farm. They were relatively wealthy. He was able to send her to post-secondary school, actually spent a good amount of money on all of his children getting educated. And then she moved to the United States and learned a lot about the economic systems that we have in this country. Meanwhile, my father grew up in a suburb just southeast of Boston, Massachusetts. He was raised by a single mother, meaning a single income for the family, and his older brothers had to get an early start on working and were kind of all collectively contributing to the family income to help pay for expenses. And despite growing up in a country of relative high wealth compared to the rest of the world, he experienced, as he describes it, kind of lower middle class life. They didn't take any vacations, a lot of the meals might have been TV dinners, a lot of time sort of spent on his own figuring out how the world works because his mother was working, I believe, 2 jobs to help support the family. I think those 2 things definitely mirrored some of my parents' behaviors with money and how they treated that and modeled those behaviors for me. And then when my 2 households split, when I sort of became the middle ground of that, it just led me to seek to understand more about that. And so I've always had this experience personally where I've never felt like I've had to need for things. I've never grown up in what I consider to be poverty. But especially when the household split, my mother retained the house and was paying the mortgage. My father paid some child support, but she was working 2 jobs to make that work because she had a bigger overhead to take care of. So I got a job as soon as I could when I was 15 to sort of help contribute to that and feel like I didn't need to ask her for money for any sort of discretionary spending. And I've taken that into my adult life, where I definitely feel like I understand both sides of the coin. I've never experienced true wealth, and also I've never experienced true poverty, but I can see how those experiences lead into people's financial decision making. I like to think about, we're all in relationships with, defining relationships with money over our lifespans. Mine is constantly evolving. Even as a financial planner, I feel a relative level of comfort and stability because I understand how some of these systems work. But in the same respect, I still go out and participate in consumer decisions and economic decisions on a regular basis and try to remind myself that it's about defining what this money represents, not necessarily acquiring as much of it as you possibly can. Because if you don't assign meaning to it, then it's really hard to get excited about the journey of, allocating it, moving it around, saving it, spending it. If you can't find true purpose behind what the money represents, then it really doesn't have much value.